Hi, everyone. Harry here to talk about the ordered release from imprisonment in Vermont of Moshe Madawi. He is the pretty high profile student, maybe the first detained under the administration's effort to redress perceived anti-Semitic activity. So he was a leader of the ongoing, long-standing, and Columbia and everyone else says poorly handled demonstrations at Columbia, which included a kind of encampment. And he was a leader of the effort. However, he asserts that he was peaceful and took no part in sort of interfering with students going to class, did nothing violent, was in fact trying to, steward a more mature presence. He's a guy who's been in the country legally for many years, including married to a U.S. citizen, went from Vermont, where he lives and considers his home, to Columbia University, participated in these demonstrations, came under the detention under this extraordinary authority that Marco Rubio has been asserting. It's very rarely used, but he seems to be bullish on it and ready to do it again and again. But it's a special provision that basically says if the Secretary of State, as I read it personally, and Rubio did exercise it personally, says this person is a real danger to the foreign security interests of the United States, he can have his immigration status revoked and he can be deported. He can't do it to a citizen, but someone who's here by, immigration grace, and he's had green card, etc. All right. So a lot of people, it's a controversial authority on Rubio's part. It exists. But wow, it seems pretty aggressive and hard to contradict. And also, there have been a lot of defenders of Madawi saying that, very involved, but not in a way that's patently anti-Semitic or otherwise should trigger this finding. All right, he does, Madawi, move for federal habeas corpus, arguing that the administration, Rubio's exercise of authority, is an unconstitutional deprivation of his First Amendment rights. Citizens, non-citizens, anyone here enjoys equal First Amendment rights, and he's saying they did it because I exercised my First Amendment rights in this in my role in the protests at Columbia, rather than doing anything wrong or over the line. Now, the U.S. contests this and says, in fact, he's a not such a benign presence, and suggests that actually there's, from what Rubio is saying, there even is potential implications for our foreign policy involving Israel and Gaza and all that stuff. Nevertheless, he was put into jail under that authority, and the district court judge in Vermont, they were going to try to transfer him to Louisiana, or where it's easier to move somebody from. The district court prevented that, and now the district court has recognized that there's some plausible claim in habeas. He hasn't adjudicated the claim in habeas corpus. So what happened today is a little bit, on the one hand, procedural and temporary, which is in essence, it's the equivalent. It's a little different because it's immigration and it's a habeas corpus motion. But basically, he got bail, or the equivalent of it today, because after the judge found that, he's got a real claim for that this was done based on his, in retaliation for, or based on his use of federally protected, constitutionally protected speech. So that we have to sort of go through it. He then turned to bail, and whether whether Madawi can be released until it goes to the actual trial. So that was a fairly standard kind of analysis that you would do in any kind of criminal case. And he's got longstanding ties to the community. He's lived in Vermont for many years, though born in the West Bank, etc. And the judge found there was enough. Now, interestingly, and this is going to come up in the habeas corpus motion itself, the Department of Justice protested and said, don't give him bail. There's some dangerous stuff to this guy. And they cited a few instances, one where he goes into a gun shop and asks about guns and tells the owner, supposedly, when I was a kid, I liked to use guns to kill Jews. And then another instance where he talked about to another person using guns because he likes to kill Jews. He denies those. He says he did go into the gun store just to find out how his wife could register a firearm, that the second one was all made up. But the point here is this factual dispute, which is unresolved, is going to come up. And if it turns out that he is not as he's represented himself to be, a kind of, just leading peaceful demonstrations and doing it in a way, he was older, the kind of mature student, etc., but actually was involved in hate speech or anti-Semitic activity, he will probably lose his habeas corpus. In other words, Rubio asserts this special authority. There's actually laws out there that say you can't even in habeas corpus challenge it. But those laws don't apply if the government is violating your constitutional rights, as, for example, if you can show they're really doing this because of protected speech. So that's going to be the fight in habeas corpus. There's going to be a factual determination by a judge of why Rubio is doing this, saying this, what the facts are. So in other words, it's far from the case that he's out of the woods. He could still find himself lawfully deported. But, that's the thing here. We want, the real fight has been not to, maybe some people ultimately that's the fight is to parry the U.S. efforts, but the really big thing is to make sure they are subject to judicial review. So that's what's going to happen, subject to judicial review. And in the meantime, as a result of today's decision, Malai will be out of jail and back in his community, maybe even returning to school. He was, by the way, pretty defiant. He got out and he, said, I'm not scared of the U.S. administration. And he, was pretty chest forward on it, and how that plays out in, again, what's the actual determination on the merits to happen, which is, did Rubio justifiably and not in retaliation for his constitutional rights exercise this authority? In which case he can legitimately be deported. That's what's coming up. That's the trial. So what happens today is between now and then, he's at large and resumes his life. So a distinct victory for him, in contrast to being in jail in Vermont, but really just a temporary one, but one that does affirm the indispensable presence of the federal courts in making at least a limited determination. And here that determination would have to do with the reason for Marco Rubio's assertion of this pretty broad and what had been before the Trump administration, unusual authority. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.